In a bold move to stabilize its economy, China has announced plans to inject 1 trillion yuan, approximately $142 billion, into its state-owned banks. This decision marks the first time since the 2008 global financial crisis that China has taken such a significant step to boost liquidity in its banking system. The implications of this action are far-reaching, as it highlights the challenges facing the Chinese economy and the delicate balance the government must maintain in order to promote growth while mitigating long-term risks. The injection of capital is primarily designed to address liquidity shortages that have persisted across the country's largest financial institutions. Over recent years, these banks have experienced increasing pressure as their ability to lend has been constrained by tightening liquidity and rising debt levels. By increasing the capital available to these state-owned banks, the government is aiming to stimulate lending, particularly to businesses and local governments, in the hopes of spurring economic activity. This decision comes at a critical time for China, as its economy has faced a series of headwinds. Slower than expected growth, coupled with the aftershocks of the global pandemic, has placed a strain on both businesses and households. Local governments, too, are grappling with mounting debt levels, which have been compounded by shrinking revenue streams and the costs associated with maintaining public services. The stimulus package, therefore, is seen as a lifeline for many regions and sectors that are struggling to stay afloat. On paper, the plan to inject 1 trillion yuan into the banking system seems like a logical step toward economic recovery. Increased liquidity could help jumpstart lending and drive growth, particularly in sectors that have seen sluggish investment. Additionally, this influx of capital is expected to provide temporary relief to local governments by helping them manage their mounting debt burdens. However, while this stimulus package may provide short-term relief, it also raises significant concerns about its long-term sustainability. A similar strategy was employed during the 2008 financial crisis, when China unleashed massive amounts of capital to stabilize its economy. While it helped to avert immediate economic collapse, it also led to a rapid increase in debt levels, which the country is still grappling with today. This new stimulus package could repeat the same pattern. One of the key risks is that the fresh injection of capital could exacerbate China's already significant debt problem. By pouring more money into the financial system, the government is essentially borrowing against the future. Much like the stimulus checks issued in other countries during the pandemic, the funds injected today will need to be repaid in the future, and the means of repayment, typically through higher taxes or inflation, could burden the economy in the long run. Another concern centers around how the stimulus will be utilized. A portion of the funds will likely be directed toward addressing local governments' debt problems, which have been growing at an alarming rate. Many local governments have relied heavily on borrowing to fund infrastructure projects and other initiatives, but as their debt has ballooned, so too have the risks of default. By injecting money into the system, the government is temporarily alleviating the pressure on these governments, but it does little to address the underlying structural issues that have led to such high levels of indebtedness in the first place. Furthermore, the nature of the stimulus, funneling money into large state-owned banks, has led some analysts to question whether this will truly benefit the broader economy. State-owned banks, while critical to China's financial system, are not always the most efficient at allocating capital. There is a risk that much of this new liquidity will be directed toward large, well-established firms and government-backed projects, rather than small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, that are in desperate need of financing. If the money fails to reach the businesses that need it most, the stimulus may end up being far less effective than intended. The international ramifications of China's stimulus plan are also worth considering. China's economic health has a profound impact on global markets, and any major changes in its financial system can send ripples throughout the world economy. The injection of liquidity could lead to increased demand for imports, helping to revive global trade. On the other hand, if the stimulus leads to inflation or further debt instability within China, it could contribute to broader financial uncertainty, particularly for countries that are heavily reliant on Chinese trade and investment. In conclusion, China's decision to inject 1 trillion yuan into its state-owned banks is a critical step in its ongoing efforts to revive its economy. While the move is likely to provide short-term relief, it comes with considerable risks, particularly in terms of long-term debt sustainability and the efficient allocation of resources. The success of this stimulus package will depend not only on how the funds are used, but also on whether China can address the deeper structural issues that have left its economy vulnerable. As the global financial community watches closely, the next steps China takes will have a significant impact not just within its own borders, but across the world. When countries inject large amounts of capital into their financial systems, the immediate effects are often seen as beneficial. Market liquidity increases, lending activity rises, and economic growth may be temporarily stimulated. However, history has shown that such financial injections are often accompanied by unintended consequences, particularly when it comes to debt and inflation. As governments and central banks pump money into their economies, the long-term risks of these actions become increasingly difficult to ignore. One of the clearest examples of this dynamic occurred in 2020, during the height of the global pandemic. Governments around the world, including China, introduced massive stimulus packages to prevent their economies from collapsing under the weight of lockdowns and widespread disruptions to trade and production. These efforts, while successful in stabilizing markets in the short term, created an environment in which inflationary pressures began to mount. The core issue with financial injections of this magnitude is that they flood the economy with liquidity, money that often doesn't correspond to actual productivity. When more money is circulating, but the production of goods and services remains the same, the result is higher prices. This is what we saw after 2020, as global inflation began to rise sharply. Costs of everyday items like groceries, fuel, and utilities surged, causing widespread concern. The same inflationary pattern was observed after the 2008 financial crisis, and now, as China plans to inject 1 trillion yuan into its economy, the risk of repeating these mistakes looms large. Inflation isn't just about higher prices. It's about the devaluation of money. When inflation rises, the purchasing power of currency diminishes. This means that people need more money to buy the same goods and services, and this can have a cascading effect throughout the economy. For example, higher grocery and fuel prices squeeze household budgets, leaving less disposable income for other goods and services. In turn, businesses may struggle as consumer spending declines, leading to slower economic growth or even recession. In the context of China's recent financial moves, the risk of inflation is particularly acute. With such a large injection of capital, the immediate concern is whether the economy can absorb the influx without triggering a rapid rise in prices. This is especially true given that much of the liquidity may be directed toward areas of the economy that are already vulnerable, such as local governments dealing with large debt loads. The stimulus, while providing temporary relief, doesn't change the underlying fact that these governments have borrowed beyond their means. By adding more liquidity into the system, The Chinese government may simply be delaying a debt reckoning rather than preventing it. Debt is a central factor in this equation. When governments and businesses borrow heavily, they must eventually repay those debts, often with interest. But as debt levels rise, repayment becomes more difficult, particularly if economic growth fails to keep pace with the debt burden. In China's case, many local governments and state-owned enterprises have accumulated massive amounts of debt, much of it to finance infrastructure projects that may not yield immediate or sustainable returns. The problem is that by injecting more money into these sectors, the government may be encouraging even more borrowing, without addressing the root causes of the debt in the first place. This can lead to what economists call a debt trap, where borrowers take on more and more debt just to meet existing obligations. The danger of such a cycle is clear. Eventually, the debt becomes unsustainable, leading to defaults, bankruptcies, and financial crises. The connection between debt and inflation becomes even more problematic when governments are forced to service their debt through inflationary measures. For example, a government may choose to devalue its currency in order to make debt repayment easier in nominal terms. However, this approach erodes the value of savings and wages, hurting ordinary citizens the most. Inflation effectively becomes a hidden tax, reducing the real value of money held by consumers and investors alike. The 2008 financial crisis serves as a cautionary tale in this regard. In the years following the crisis, many countries, including China, adopted aggressive monetary policies to stimulate growth. While these policies succeeded in averting a complete economic collapse, they also led to a rapid buildup of debt, both public and private. As a result, global debt levels today are higher than they were in the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, and the risk of inflationary pressures remains significant. In the current environment, with China preparing to inject massive liquidity into its financial system, the question is not whether inflation will occur, but how severe it will be. The government must carefully manage the delicate balance between stimulating growth and controlling inflation. Failure to do so could result in a scenario where short-term gains are quickly eroded by rising prices, leading to a longer-term economic downturn. Moreover, the global implications of China's actions cannot be overlooked. As one of the world's largest economies, any inflationary pressures in China will inevitably spill over into international markets. Countries that rely on Chinese imports may face higher prices for goods, further exacerbating global inflationary trends. Additionally, as China's debt levels continue to rise, the risk of a debt crisis with global repercussions becomes more real. In conclusion, while China's financial stimulus may provide a temporary boost to its economy, the long-term risks of debt and inflation are significant. Historical patterns, particularly from 2008 and 2020, suggest that large injections of capital often come with unintended consequences. As China navigates this precarious path, it will need to carefully consider the balance between immediate economic relief and the sustainability of its financial system in the years to come. The global economy is teetering on the edge of a significant debt crisis. Over the past decade, the accumulation of debt by governments, corporations, and financial institutions has reached unprecedented levels. Today, we are facing not only recorded debt, but also an alarming amount of unrecorded or hidden debt, with estimates indicating that $65 trillion in unrecorded dollar-denominated debt exists within the global financial system. This hidden debt represents a ticking time bomb, one that could trigger a liquidity crunch with potentially devastating consequences for markets and economies worldwide. At the heart of this crisis lies the growing reliance on debt as a mechanism for sustaining economic growth. Governments, especially in developed economies, have become increasingly dependent on borrowing to fund their expenditures. Low interest rates and loose monetary policies over the past decade have created an environment where borrowing has become relatively cheap and easy, encouraging excessive risk-taking. However, the sheer scale of the debt that has been amassed is now raising serious concerns about whether this model is sustainable. The $65 trillion in unrecorded debt is primarily linked to the use of foreign exchange, FX swaps, financial instruments that allow companies, central banks, and financial institutions to manage currency risk. These swaps, however, have become an opaque and poorly understood component of global finance. They exist largely off the balance sheets of many institutions, meaning that official debt statistics significantly underestimate the true level of risk present in the system. What makes this hidden debt particularly dangerous is the lack of transparency surrounding it. When financial markets experience stress, institutions that rely heavily on FX swaps may find themselves unable to meet their obligations, leading to sudden liquidity shortfalls. In essence, a liquidity crunch occurs when the demand for cash or liquid assets exceeds the supply available in the market. This can happen quickly and unexpectedly as financial institutions scramble to cover their short-term debts. The result is often market volatility as investors react to the uncertainty, driving prices down and exacerbating the crisis. The risks of a global liquidity crunch are compounded by the fact that debt levels have risen across both developed and emerging markets. In advanced economies like the United States, Japan, and the European Union, debt-to-GDP ratios have soared in recent years. Governments have taken on more debt to finance stimulus programs, infrastructure projects, and social services. But as their debt burdens grow, so too do the risks of default. Meanwhile, in emerging markets, many countries have borrowed heavily in foreign currencies, particularly the US dollar. This exposes them to additional risks, as fluctuations in exchange rates can make it more expensive to service their debts, further straining their economies. One of the most concerning aspects of the global debt crisis is the role that central banks play in perpetuating it. By keeping interest rates at historically low levels, central banks have effectively incentivized more borrowing. While these policies have helped to prop up markets in the short term, they have also encouraged financial institutions and governments to take on more risk. As interest rates begin to rise, as we are seeing now in many parts of the world, the cost of servicing this debt will increase, placing even more pressure on already stretched budgets. The systemic risk posed by this level of global debt cannot be overstated. As debt levels continue to climb, the possibility of widespread defaults grows, particularly among smaller or weaker financial institutions. A default at even one major institution could set off a chain reaction, with other institutions that are exposed to that debt also finding themselves unable to meet their obligations. This interconnectedness of the global financial system means that a crisis in one part of the world can quickly spread to others, as we saw during the 2008 financial crisis. Experts warn that we may be approaching a tipping point, where the accumulation of debt and the growing risk of a liquidity crunch converge to create a perfect storm. One of the key indicators of this looming crisis is the increasing volatility in global markets. We are already witnessing signs of instability, with sharp fluctuations in stock prices, bond yields, and currency values. Investors are growing increasingly nervous, and as confidence wanes, the likelihood of a full-blown financial crisis grows. In the event of a global liquidity crunch, the consequences could be severe. Central banks may attempt to intervene, as they did during the 2008 financial crisis, by injecting more liquidity into the markets. However, given the already high levels of debt and the fragile state of the global economy, this may not be enough to stave off a broader collapse. Additionally, the effectiveness of such interventions could be limited by the fact that many central banks have already exhausted much of their monetary ammunition through years of low interest rates and quantitative easing. The potential for a systemic collapse is particularly worrisome in the context of the growing reliance on speculative financial instruments, such as derivatives and FX swaps, that have become deeply embedded in the global financial system. These instruments, while useful for managing risk in normal times, can amplify market instability during periods of stress. In a crisis, they could act as accelerants, driving institutions to the brink of insolvency more rapidly than in previous downturns. The global debt crisis is not a theoretical concern. It is a real and present danger that requires immediate attention from policymakers, regulators, and financial institutions. Addressing this issue will not be easy, as it will likely require a combination of fiscal discipline, regulatory reforms, and international cooperation to mitigate the risks posed by rising debt levels and hidden financial exposures. In conclusion, the global debt crisis is a multifaceted problem with far-reaching implications for the stability of the financial system. With $65 trillion in unrecorded dollar debt and growing signs of market volatility, the world is facing the very real threat of a liquidity crunch that could trigger a systemic collapse. The question now is whether the global community can act swiftly enough to avert disaster, or whether we will find ourselves once again grappling with the consequences of unchecked debt and financial risk. The clock is ticking, and the stakes have never been higher. As the global financial system grapples with rising debt and the threat of a liquidity crisis, alternative solutions are being explored to alleviate these pressures. Cryptocurrencies, particularly XRP, and others designed for financial transactions, have emerged as potential tools for addressing liquidity constraints. Unlike traditional financial assets, cryptocurrencies offer a decentralized and efficient way of transferring value across borders, enabling faster, more cost-effective transactions. This capacity to enhance liquidity in real time has positioned cryptocurrencies as a possible solution to the challenges facing the global financial system. One of the primary advantages of cryptocurrencies in this context is their ability to facilitate on-demand liquidity. In traditional banking systems, a significant amount of capital is tied up in what are known as nostro and vostro accounts, funds held by banks in foreign currencies to facilitate cross-border transactions. These accounts can lock up trillions of dollars, rendering them unavailable for other uses. XRP, the cryptocurrency developed by Ripple, addresses this issue by offering an efficient and scalable means of transferring value without the need for these pre-funded accounts. Ripple's XRP ledger allows for nearly instantaneous transfers of value between institutions, bypassing the need for nostro-vostro arrangements. This frees up capital that would otherwise be sitting idle, allowing it to be deployed more productively within the financial system. By reducing the reliance on pre-funded accounts, XRP has the potential to release trillions of dollars back into circulation, enhancing liquidity and reducing inefficiencies. In addition to solving liquidity problems, Ripple has developed a specialized solution designed to work alongside central banks. Its central bank digital currency, CBDC, private ledger. The CBDC private ledger is built on the same technology that powers the XRP ledger, but is customized for central banks looking to issue digital versions of their national currencies. This technology offers a secure, scalable, and energy-efficient way for central banks to manage and distribute digital currencies, addressing concerns around transparency, security, and privacy. The potential of CBDCs to revolutionize the global financial system cannot be overstated. By leveraging blockchain technology, CBDCs offer a level of transparency and traceability that traditional fiat currencies cannot match. Central banks can monitor the flow of money in real time, enabling more effective monetary policy and reducing the risks of fraud and money laundering. The introduction of digital currencies could also enhance financial inclusion by providing unbanked and underbanked populations with access to digital financial services. Ripple's CBDC private ledger is uniquely positioned to play a key role in this transition. Unlike public blockchains, which can be slow and resource-intensive, Ripple's private ledger is designed to handle the transaction volumes required by central banks. It is also carbon neutral, making it a more sustainable option compared to proof-of-work cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. As governments and central banks around the world explore the possibility of launching their own digital currencies, Ripple's technology could be instrumental in helping them navigate this complex landscape. One of the most compelling aspects of XRP and Ripple's solutions is their ability to provide liquidity during times of financial stress. In the event of a liquidity crunch, where traditional financial institutions may struggle to access liquid assets, cryptocurrencies like XRP can act as a bridge, facilitating the transfer of value between entities that may otherwise be unable to complete transactions. This capacity for real-time liquidity provisioning could be crucial in averting a full-blown financial crisis, particularly as debt levels rise and the risk of liquidity shortages increases. In a world where financial crises can unfold rapidly due to the interconnectedness of global markets, the ability to quickly move money across borders and institutions is vital. Cryptocurrencies, with their decentralized nature and ability to bypass traditional financial intermediaries, offer a solution to this problem. By reducing the friction and delays associated with cross-border payments, cryptocurrencies can help maintain the flow of liquidity, even in times of market instability. However, it is important to acknowledge that the widespread adoption of cryptocurrencies as a liquidity solution is not without challenges. Regulatory uncertainty remains a significant barrier as governments and financial institutions grapple with how to integrate digital currencies into existing regulatory frameworks. In many jurisdictions, the legal status of cryptocurrencies is still unclear, and concerns about their use in illicit activities persist. For cryptocurrencies like XRP to achieve their full potential as liquidity solutions, these regulatory hurdles will need to be addressed. Moreover, the volatility of cryptocurrencies presents another challenge. While XRP and other digital assets have been designed to facilitate stable, efficient transactions, the broader cryptocurrency market is still highly speculative. Prices can fluctuate dramatically over short periods, which introduces risks for institutions looking to use cryptocurrencies as a stable source of liquidity. Efforts to reduce volatility, such as the development of stablecoins, cryptocurrencies pegged to the value of traditional currencies, are already underway, but the issue remains a significant consideration for institutional adoption. Despite these challenges, the potential of cryptocurrencies to address liquidity concerns is undeniable. As the world moves toward a more digital and interconnected financial system, the need for efficient, decentralized liquidity solutions will only grow. XRP, with its focus on real-time cross-border payments, and Ripple's CBDC private ledger, designed to integrate seamlessly with central bank policies, are well positioned to lead this shift. The global financial system stands at a crossroads, facing rising debt levels and the increasing threat of liquidity crises. Cryptocurrencies offer a glimpse of a future where liquidity is more readily available, capital is deployed more efficiently, and financial transactions are faster and more transparent. Whether through the adoption of CBDCs or the broader use of digital assets like XRP, it is clear that the role of cryptocurrencies in addressing the global liquidity problem is becoming increasingly important. The next step will be ensuring that regulatory frameworks evolve in tandem with technological advancements, allowing these digital innovations to reach their full potential. The global financial system is standing on precarious ground, and the warning signs are increasingly hard to ignore. As debt levels rise and liquidity becomes tighter, the risk of a systemic collapse looms larger. Analysts and experts are beginning to point toward 2025 to 2026 as a critical period during which the financial system, as we know it, could face a dramatic implosion. The actions being taken by central banks today, while appearing to stabilize markets in the short term, may actually be setting the stage for this inevitable collapse. The heart of the issue lies in the unsustainable levels of debt that have accumulated across the world. Governments, corporations, and households have borrowed extensively to maintain economic growth, but the costs of servicing these debts are mounting. Central banks, in response to these growing debt burdens, have employed aggressive monetary policies such as quantitative easing and historically low interest rates. While these policies have helped prop up markets and prevent immediate economic downturns, they have created an artificial environment of cheap money that has allowed debt to spiral out of control. The problem with this strategy is that it cannot continue indefinitely. As debt levels rise, the ability of borrowers to service their loans becomes increasingly strained. At some point, the burden of this debt becomes too great to bear, and defaults begin to occur. Once defaults start, particularly in critical sectors like banking and real estate, the ripple effects can quickly lead to a full-blown financial crisis. We have seen this pattern before, most notably in 2008, when the US subprime mortgage market collapsed, triggering a global recession. However, the potential crisis on the horizon could be far more severe, given the sheer scale of global debt today. What makes the current situation even more concerning is that central banks seem to be intentionally delaying the inevitable. Instead of taking meaningful steps to reduce debt or address structural imbalances in the financial system, they are doubling down on the same policies that created these problems in the first place. By continuing to inject liquidity into the markets and keeping interest rates artificially low, central banks are merely kicking the can down the road, ensuring that when the crash does come, it will be even more devastating. One theory that is gaining traction is that central banks are not merely responding to the financial pressures of the moment, but are actually preparing for a larger transition: the shift to a digital financial system. The rise of cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and other digital assets suggests that we are on the brink of a major transformation in how the global financial system operates. Some believe that central banks may be deliberately allowing the current system to reach a breaking point, after which they can introduce a new, digital-based system as the solution. This theory is not without merit. Over the past few years, we have seen increasing interest from central banks and governments in developing and implementing digital currencies. These digital currencies would offer central banks unprecedented control over monetary policy, allowing them to track and regulate transactions in real time. In a digital financial system, central banks could manage inflation, stimulate or contract the economy, and even control individual spending behaviors with far greater precision than is possible with today's fiat currencies. In many ways, the groundwork for this transition is already being laid. Pilot programs for CBDCs are being tested in various countries, and blockchain technology, which underpins digital currencies, is becoming more widely accepted in financial institutions. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and XRP, which initially seemed like disruptive forces outside the traditional financial system, are now being seen as possible complements or even integral parts of the future financial landscape. However, the transition to a digital financial system is not without significant risks. One of the most immediate concerns is the potential loss of financial privacy. In a fully digital system, every transaction could be tracked, recorded, and scrutinized by authorities. This raises serious questions about the balance between government control and individual freedom. Additionally, the centralization of monetary power in the hands of a few central banks or governments could lead to greater financial inequality and increased economic control over the lives of ordinary citizens. Another risk associated with the shift to a digital financial system is the vulnerability of digital currencies to cyber attacks and technological failures. While blockchain technology is often hailed for its security, no system is entirely foolproof. A coordinated cyber attack on a global digital currency system could have catastrophic consequences, potentially leading to the loss of trillions of dollars and destabilizing the entire global economy. Furthermore, the transition itself could be destabilizing. If central banks begin to phase out traditional fiat currencies in favor of digital alternatives, there could be significant market disruptions as businesses and consumers adjust to the new system. In particular, traditional financial institutions like banks could find themselves increasingly obsolete, as blockchain technology enables peer-to-peer transactions without the need for intermediaries. Despite these risks, the momentum toward a digital financial system appears to be growing. The actions of central banks, whether intentional or not, are accelerating the process. By propping up the current system with artificial liquidity injections, they may be creating the conditions for a catastrophic collapse, after which a digital system could emerge as the solution. In conclusion, the financial system is at a critical juncture. The global debt burden, combined with the actions of central banks, is pushing the system toward a breaking point. While a crash seems likely in the next few years, the bigger question is what comes after. The transition to a digital financial system may offer a way out of the current crisis, but it is fraught with its own challenges and risks. As we move closer to 2025 to 2026, it is clear that the world's financial future is uncertain, and the decisions made in the coming years will shape the course of the global economy for decades to come.